Oh,
That's crazy. The fact that you're, in Noriega's house, first of all, then doing lines on his desk, second of all, is just some of the craziest stuff I've ever heard. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Becoming the King of Pot. My name's Todd Denkin, and with me, of course, is the King of Pots, my cousin and criminal and infamous smuggler, Bruce Perlowin. Bruce, how's it going?
it's going great, Todd. I'm really excited to continue the story of my good friend, Steven Kalish, another giant monster smuggler.
Yes, back today is our gentleman smuggler, Steven Kalish. And Steven, last time we left, we were talking about this giant 300,000 pounds of marijuana that you were about to bring to the Gulf Coast. So let's pick that up as you're trying to figure out. You had just found your offload spot, right?
Yes, in southern Louisiana, which, on a side note, I loved being down with my crew in southern Louisiana. Cajun people are great. I mean,
Yeah.
the food's great, and we loved it. So we had a intercoastal um marine. Um, one of my lieutenants had a contact with a shipyard in southern Louisiana, and I had gone over to Louisiana to check it out, and it was perfect. I mean, it was like isolated, and they were, you know, Cajuns, and they were honest guys, and they were, you know, chomping at a bit for $1 million in cash.
Yeah.
And no idea how much power we were money. That was not something we would usually advertise. Um, we just said we were going to bring a barge in and some tractor trailer, refrigerated 40-foot tractor trailers, and needed their marina for a night. Not the marina, their facility for a night.
Steven, let me ask you, you weren't on the boats like Bruce was, right? You were kind of handling things on shore and just sort of coordinating things. Is that what happened?
Always um, coordinating things. Now, um, I had been on the boats, but at this point, I'm on a federal appeal bond, and it's not a good idea for me to put myself in that kind of harm's way because if anything does go south, it's got to be somebody to hire the attorneys and make the bonds. And so I was on a roving patrol running pretty much the op over the radio, over our radios. And I had close to 150 plus crew for the operation
Wow.
and mechanized conveyors and the operation went. I mean, I could spend an hour just on the op, but I was called Operation Bulldog because the tug was named the Bulldog. And it was loaded in Barranquilla, Colombia, and sailed all the way up to Louisiana, up the Lafayette River, through the locks to this facility, this intercoastal marine facility. And we docked at, you know, Murphy's Law, if something will go wrong, it will, it does. And it does because when you're towing a barge, when you come inland into the waterways, you have to push the barge up on land and then come around and you're towing the barge. So once you push it up on the bank, then you start pushing the barge before you get through the locks. So
Right.
he had pushed the barge too far up on land, burned out one of the diesel engines in the tugboat, Um, you know, and then when he gets to the lock operator, the captain, he's asked where his origin is from, and he had been specifically told to say Freeport, Texas, and he goes, Coatzacoalcos, Mexico, which meant that the lock operator had to notify U.S. Customs that a international tug and barge had just entered their waterway, which I thought, well, now we're on the clock. Now we have to unload everything in one night, which we had planned on doing. So we had mechanized electric conveyors, 6 tractor trailers, refrigerated, um, and I think we unloaded the last 40,000 pounds into the 6 tractor trailer by about 5 o'clock in the morning. What we had discovered was, this is rather funny, the tug had sprung a leak, whether it was in the rough seas, whether when it was pushed up on the bank when they were switching sides with the tugboat. But about 25,000 pounds was wet, and we couldn't take that 25,000 pounds and put it in our tractor trailer where it would have overloaded the gross capacity, which was 50,000 pounds, which is a problem when you're traveling the interstates, for your weigh stations. But we had tags that they couldn't open the backs of the tractor trailers, and we offloaded all the pod, and we left 20,000 plus pounds on the tugboat. And we knew U.S. Customs would be showing up the next day to, ask for the paperwork and certificate of origin and, all the normal things that they would do. So we cleaned up the spot, we cleaned up the tug, we welded the barge hole back in together, and off we went. And I drove to Lafayette and took one of our jets up to Pennsylvania, I believe. And from there, I went and met 2 of the tractor trailers to be there for the weigh-in and to examine the quality of them, which turned out to be, gold by Colombian, just, and this was June. We all floated June 18th, 1983, and this was June 19th. So I looked at Lee after looking at the pot and rolling a joint, going, it's the middle of summer. Everybody in America is holding pot. And I go, Lee, at the minimum, we need to wholesale this at $275 or higher. And of course, he agreed. He was all about the money. I was more about the money and my crew. And, I wanted to make money, but, it was all my crew pretty much. And I wanted all of them fairly compensated. So anyway, we sold it all in 30 days, which was unexpected, for 3 weeks. So we have literally $80 million or somewhere, 80 million plus, in different parts of the U.S., Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, that we now have to transport back to our safe house in Tampa for counting. And I had bought a home in Tampa, a $1 billion home that I put a lot of money into it. And nobody knew of the Nobody knew the home. And literally nobody, except for a couple of my guys from Texas and Lee Rich and his brother, I believe. So we had transported all the money back to Tampa. I had to count it.
And what's it like moving $80 million of cash?
It's putting air shocks on Buick Oldsmobile 98s with big trunks and filling American overseas tourister bags full of hundreds, 50s, 20s.
And how big is $80 million? Like, how much volume and space does that take up?
Well, we never had 80 million at one time at the safe house, at the counting house, for several reasons. But it filled I would say a 12 by 12 room. I mean, depending on the denominations. I mean, your first denominations you take in are hundreds and fifties, and then it's 20s and 10s, and then there's fives. We had millions of dollars in $5 bills that became our play money, so to speak. I mean, I bought a Ferrari with $5 bills, a $100,000 Ferrari.
That's
We bought
awesome.
a $5 million sport fisherman with $5 bills. We bought because the Cayman Islands, we had been taking a lot of this money to the Cayman Islands, where we would, Cayman Islands allowed money to be brought in without any problems. The trouble with the Cayman Islands was that DEA was usually at the airport, and if Cayman Islands Customs opened your big coolers that were filled with money, they would see the money. The second problem with the Cayman Islands was that all the banks of the Caymans would send the money back to the Miami Fed or Reserve. And the Miami Fed, DEA finally started watching the money coming back to the Miami Fed. So they would see $20 million come from the Cayman Islands to the Miami Fed and know that some smuggler had just finished a major op. Well, these were concerns that I had. And what turned me off at the Cayman Islands was when the bankers said they'd only take by 50s and hundreds. They wouldn't take by 20s or 10s or 5s. And I said, fuck you, I said, I'm paying you 4 points on laundering the money. I said, you're going to take all my money or you get none of it. Right. Of course, these were Lee Rich's connections that had become mine. And Lee was going, calm down, Skip. And I'm going, no, fuck you guys. I'm not bringing my money down if you won't take all of it.
Let me interject. You get a little bit arrogant when you just made, 20 or 40 million or $80 million. So you can tell them to go fuck off.
Well,
right.
Yeah, I mean, they're making 4 points off of everything we're bringing in. So they're making and they have been for years. So I didn't have any trouble telling them that they wouldn't get my business anymore. Now, I didn't have another place to launder my money at the time. I literally did not know where else to go at that time. We still had $20-30 million, that we had to launder somewhere. But Bruce, you were laundering your money's in the Caymans, weren't you?
Yeah, I just didn't take that much down at once, and I never had a problem. Well, actually, You did. What I did, I went to Las Vegas and changed all those lower denominations into hundreds, not hundreds and fifties, just into hundreds. So when we went down to the Cayman Islands, same as you on Lear jets, um, and it was all hundreds, and we didn't have a problem ever, you know. But it wasn't as much as it wasn't 20 million at a time. Mine was closer to 1, 2, 3, and 4 million.
Well, just to be clear, we never took more than 5 million at a time. We never took more than 5 million for a couple reasons. One, they had just busted, 6 or 7 million on a Learjet at the main Fort Lauderdale airport. So we devised a system flying out of Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport where we would wait and keep our $5 million in the back of the Oldsmobiles. We would file our flight plan for the Cayman Islands. You have to take off within 30 minutes of filing your flight plan. So U.S. Customs I could see the U.S. Customs office from the car I was sitting in. They were that close to the fixed space of operations at Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport. So 10 minutes before we had to take off, we would load the overseas Halliburton, not Halliburton, the American Tourister overseas bags, which would hold $5 million in hundreds, would hold $1 million in 20s, and the $500,000 in 50s. And most of the money we were taking to the Caymans were 50s, 20s, because, right away, I mean, literally 2 days after I finished the up, Julio Nasser wanting me to fly him $5 million back down to San Andreas. I'm going, Julio, I'm still up in Pennsylvania. We're calling from payphones miles away.
Sure.
One thing, and this is probably similar to Bruce, we would carry around $200 bags of quarters, right? And we would go into the bank and get $200 worth of quarters and then use payphones, never the same payphone, to call Colombia to talk to the Colombians. It always in code, but I had to take $5 million back to San Andreas to Julio, and I forget what I owed him. I owed him $35 on the 275,000 pounds. I didn't have to pay him for the wet pot. It was just an understood thing. So I just have to intercede. So we left the wet pot on the barge. U.S. Customs shows up at the dock the next day. We have one person on the boat. He has to see the captain, has to board the boat. Captain isn't there. Deckhand says, I can't let you on the boat. Not to wait for the captain. So that pisses him off. He leaves. Our deckhand leaves. So they come back with their task force and find the wet pot on the boat, on the barge, and think it's the load. They think that's the 25,000 pounds we're bringing in. They have no idea. We've already unloaded 275,000 pounds of pot. They stake it out for 2 days. Their task force in the swamp, in the mosquitoes. And then there's a front page article about a big bust in South Louisiana of 25,000 pounds. And by that time, we're up in Pennsylvania, weighing and, counting the pot that's up there. But anyway, so the problem of the transport from back east was the corridor. It was a known trafficking corridor. So we had to put guys in coats and ties business-looking people in business-looking cars, transported all the money back to our safe house, where we had multiple counting machines, where we count all the money, and put counted money in bank wrap binders and in one corner. And, I wasn't staying at the safe house. I was there off and on. And my guys, I had two of my most trusted guys and their wives. And they were literally, the wives would make beds on top of the money and sleep on the money. And my guys would go out and fish in a big lake behind my house. And to this day, he has Don Nichols, one of my best friends, and ran my entire crew. He actually caught a 10-pound, 4-ounce bass in the lake behind my house. He told me the other day, he said, that's still my record catch, because they would, at night, when the wives were sleeping, they'd go out fishing on the Bass Lake. So then, then we had to get it to the Cayman Islands. $5 million a pop, $5 million at a trip. That way, if we lost, if for any reason we lost anything, it was only $5 million. But we
I
never
love
did.
how you say it was only $5 million that we lost. Yeah, only $5 million.
Better
you
than
know.
20 million.
Yeah, no, it's better than 20 million. Bruce, were you involved in that kind of cash also? I know you were moving it around and you had several businesses to launder your money. In Scarface, Frank, famously says to Tony, "Hey, Tony, the problem is what to do with all the fucking money." Right? Was it really a problem to launder that money and to
Absolutely, it's a big pain. Now, my loads were $9 million each. Okay, so 30,000 times, and we sold it for 300 in California. Sometimes 3.25. All right, if it was really good, it was 3.25. But call it 9 million, or between 9 and 10. And 9 million. It doesn't come in 9 million at a time. It comes in 3 weeks. We get paid in 3 weeks, just like Steve got paid in 30 days. But the idea is to move the money my idea was move the money as quick as possible. So I don't think I moved more than $2 million at a time. When $250,000 was my number to move it. Go pay the Colombians, pay the crew, buy more boats, go spend it, buy more docks, whatever, hide it, fly it to the Cayman Islands. I was sending money to Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Panama, Bahamas, Belize, just putting in bank accounts all over, including U.S. banks, but not that much in U.S. banks, buying more boats. But yeah, it's a major problem. It's a big hassle. And of course, in the early episodes, you heard me say that I would take my money to Las Vegas. Two techniques. The first technique is you put it in the cage. Let's say you put $250,000, $500,000 in a cage. Okay, in those cases, we could take $500,000, and that's somewhat normal. There's big, rich gamblers that do that. That doesn't freak anybody out. And you go and you gamble from 1 to 5 hours, and the idea is not, don't lose money. Go eat. Go, hang out in the casino.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
when you feel more comfortable, they think you've been gambling this time, you go back and you cash out all your chips and take out the rest of your money, and it's all in hundreds. They don't give you 20s. Now you got the hundreds. So, and then later we just brought it to the casino and they just cashed it for us for 3%. Finders, VIG.
Right.
And so that's what I did. So I always had hundreds, but it is a giant problem. It's not a joke. And in Steve's book, he talks about now what do you do with the money? And you actually said in here, Steve, that the logistics of moving the money was just as important or draconian as the logistics of doing a smuggle. He bought a whole fleet of cars he bought a whole fleet of cars just to move the money around.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, after going through all the work, the last thing you want to do is lose the money on some stupid incident.
Sure.
And then you got to have responsible people working for you, pilots that that will keep their mouths quiet. None of our pilots knew we were flying money, not from us telling them. They knew what we were doing. It's just we never told them what we were doing. So they could say in court that they were never part of the criminal enterprise. I mean, I'm still friends with one of my pilots that flew me to the Caymans a half a dozen times. I mean, I talked to her 2 weeks ago. You know, sweet woman. She flew an Aero Commander 1000, which was a little more low key than a Learjet. But once you got to the Caymans, it was party time. Once you put them in your shell corporations, once you put the money in the numbered accounts, you had your shell corporation, which you could then funnel money into for the purchase of properties and cars and all the other toys and things you needed to further your operations in the United States, which is similar to what Bruce must have been doing.
Yeah, so how did you do the transition? Well, the transition from to the Caymans over to Panama. Now you got you got pissed off because they wouldn't take your 5s and 10s and 20s.
Oh, ridiculous story. I was fearless. And my Colombian connection had a nephew. The son-in-law lived in Miami. And this pissed off Julio Nasser that his son-in-law turned me on to this Colombian that had a connection in Panama. So he called me up and I told him I was having trouble laundering any more money in the Caymans. And he said that he had some connections down in Panama. I said, well, what kind of connections? He said, banking connections. And I go, okay, I'll take down, I think I took down $3 million, $2.7 million in hundreds. And I rented I didn't want to take our jet. I took a leased corporate jet. And I took one of my friends I'd known since I was 15 years old. And I said, do you want to fly down to Panama with me? He said, well, what are we doing? I said, well, I don't know. We're flying into Panama City. Always wanted to go there. And my Colombians assure me it's safe. But I don't know, we're going to go see. So we land at the airport, Omar Torrijos Airport, I believe it's called at the time. And it's a main airport. But we taxi, we taxi to 2 stretch Gucci limousines. And there's Panamanian customs there waiting for us that just want to stamp our passports. And we all have passports. I have one under Frank William Brown at the time. That's my latest. Was my cleanest and latest alias I was using.
Right.
And I meet 2 individuals a guy named Cesar Rodriguez, who was at the airport and owned the Gucci stretch limos, and Enrique Brutel, who was a more straight-laced partner. And they take us to Bank of Commerce and Credit International, all right, which is called BCCI, which is, if you want to know more about it, watch The Insider with Brian Cranston. It's a whole story of how they busted BCCI off of all the information they gleaned from my laundering money to BCCI. But anyway, so we go to BCCI. I meet the head of the bank, Chairman. He's actually the president, CEO. His name's Amjad Awan. And go in, I ask him what he can do. and he's not charging us anything for putting our monies in his bank. They like the money. They want monies in their bank because it allows them to loan money and make money.
Sure.
So, he sets up numbered accounts for us, and I think I put $2 million, in my first deposit, or maybe 2.5. 2.5. This was a test run. I had to be careful, and I didn't know who I was dealing with or what was going to happen.
The funny part is your test run is with $2.5 million, which most people in the world have never seen $2.5 million in their lifetime. And for you, it's pocket change.
Well, it wasn't pocket change, but I had to show them that I was serious about coming to Panama, and I figured $2.5 million was serious enough at that time, 1983. So anyway, from there I go to their corporate offices that belong to Rodriguez and Patel, and they have these extravagant offices in the Bank of Boston, and they own on the penthouse they have an executive club for officers of the Panamanian military and high profile businessmen in Panama, and they're making 10% profit off of every government contract coming out of Panama. I mean, they're just making a killing of everything. So I fall in love with their whole operation, and I spend a couple of days. And Cesar Rodriguez, he's like a brother. Over the next year, we're literally like brothers. And I fall in love with Panama, and they asked me if I want to invest into their company in Panama. And I said, well, what's that going to cost me? And what am I going to get? Show me your books.
I bet it's going to cost you $2.5 million.
40,000 for 25% interest. And they said the only caveat is I have to meet their silent partner. And I said, well, who's your silent partner? And they go, well, it's General Manuel Noriega. And I go, okay. I assume that he's somebody aboard in Panama. Who is he exactly? And they go, look, you obviously hadn't done your homework, which I hadn't. The transition of political dynamics in Panama was ever evolving. With Torrijos and Ustinas, and Noriega had only been in power for maybe 6 months. Anyway, they tell me I got to meet their partner who's got to give his seal of approval. Because he owns 25% of this company called Servicios Turísticos de Panama. Tourist Services of Panama. Anyway, so I go, look, I don't do business with military. I've never trusted them throughout my smuggling days in Oaxaca and throughout Mexico. I just didn't trust military guys. But, it's a new opportunity. So, they set up a meeting with Noriega at his home in, a very exclusive neighborhood.
Yeah, he lived in like a palace, wasn't it?
No, it was a ranch style home. Protected like a palace. Probably 10, 12,000 square feet.
Yeah.
I eventually ended up buying a home 2 blocks away, for well over $1 million. So I'd be close. But anyway, so I go into this meeting with General Noriega, and it's me and Jorge Martinez, who's a Cuban, Cesar Rodriguez, and Enrique Patel. Noriega's in his dressed down uniforms with his stars on his shoulders and, all his plaques.
Yeah.
And we're introduced, and he understands pretty good English. My Spanish is not bad. I mean, it's good enough to talk to him, but Noriega was very, if he could speak perfect English, he wouldn't speak at all. So he insisted on a translate, which was fine by me.
Yeah.
So I tell him, I have 3 points. I want to live in Panama. I want to be safe from the scrutiny of the U.S. government without elaborating. I said I have upwards of $100 million that I need to bring to Panama and invest in Panama and safely store in the banks of Panama. And 3, I understand that democratic elections are set for 1984, February, and I want to live in a country, in a democracy in Central America. And he tells me yes to, I could be safe in Panama. Yes, I can launder my money. And yes, elections are in February of 1984. And I said, well, and I want to call Panama my home, and I want to start transitioning Panama to my home base. Because by this time, I'm a wanted federal fugitive for failure to surrender on an appeal bond in Galveston, Texas. I've also been indicted in the Eastern District of Texas for another 400,000 pounds of marijuana we'd smuggled in while I was on an appeal bond.
Right.
And I knew that I needed a safe place to live.
And just for the record, while he was a federal fugitive, he brought in over 1 million pounds of marijuana. And, and I got that from this. How much?
Almost $1 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably close to 1 million pounds of pot. So I knew if I was ever caught, I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison. I mean, it was one of those things, I was very familiar with continuing criminal enterprise, which
Right.
was harshest statute in the Federal Criminal Code. So anyway, Noriega says, okay, come live in Panama. I go, thank you very much. Cesar Rodriguez had suggested that I bring a gift to Noriega to show my appreciation. And I had a brand new thin silver Halliburton that had just come out, it's gold plated, not gold plated, but gold. And I just got it. I'd had it a week. And I put I couldn't take $300,000 to Noriega in a garbage bag.
Right.
Right. Or some grumpy suitcase. So I said, all right, I'll make the sacrifice. And I had asked my partner, Cesar Rodriguez, how much to bring, and he wouldn't tell me. He said, well, that's up to you. How big of an impression do you want to make? So I said, fuck. I guess 300,000's a nice impression. So I put it in my silver Halliburton and set it down in front of his desk. So as I'm leaving the meeting with Noriega, he says, he goes, Brown. He called me Brown. Frank Skip Brown, right? He liked the name Brown. It's easy for him. He goes, Brown, you're forgetting your briefcase. I go, no. I tell him it's for him in Spanish. No, it's but a T. So he doesn't know what's in it. So we go back to the Baker Boston offices, and about 2 hours later, the meeting was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So 2 hours later, or hour and a half later, we get a call that I'm a invited guest to a special gathering at their canal offices or a cocktail party, a happy hour with lots of women and all the colonels. The Panamanian Defense Forces were broken up there was one general, and then there were different ranking colonels, right? So all of the high-ranking Panamanian Defense Forces got to be there, and all the prominent businessmen in Panama. And it was highly suggested that I go to this party, which is not my thing. Not, it just wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
Cesar said, you got to go. So I get to the party. It's probably about 5:30 in the afternoon, 6 o'clock. And Noriega invites me in and braces me in a barrack. Before you can get in, you got to go through, massive security, Noriega's security details. And
Sure.
they're nonsense. But when I finally get in, Noriega walks up to me and embraces me in a barrack like I'm his lifelong friend. He puts his arm around me, says, I got to introduce you to some of the people at the party. So he introduces me to a number of the colonels, the important ones, the ones in charge of finance, G2, military intelligence, the ones that I might need to know. And then he introduces me to some other bankers and businessmen from both Cologne, from both the ports in Panama. And there's beautiful women at this party. I mean, drop dead gorgeous women. And of course, I can't take my eyes off of them. I'm 30 years old and, I'm thinking about women and, So Noriega takes me into his private office. It pulls out the chair behind his desk, and there's this big picture window overlooking the Panama Canal, and then there's ships transiting the canal. And he says, sit down, Brown, relax, take a break, watch the ships transit the canal, you come back and join us, right? Well, I sit down, and I'm with Jorge Martinez, and I'm sitting behind Noriega's desk. And I'm going, I looked over at Jorge Martinez and I go, did you know coming down here, we were going to meet the head of the military and the de facto leader of Panama? He said, no, I had no idea. I go, well, apparently, we're connected to the right people. I said,
Yeah.
it's party time. So I broke out some Bolivian flake cocaine I had, started making lines on Noriega's desk, started a couple lines of cocaine. And I said to Jorge, I did a book report on the Panama Canal when I was in the 5th grade. I said, and never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be watching ships transit the canal loading cocaine on Noriega's desk. And about that time, to finish up this part of the story, about that time, Jorge says, well, I'm going to go get that chica that you were so enamored with. and she comes into Noriega's office, or he leaves, shut the door, leave it the rest to your imagination.
Oh, what do you mean? No. We want some details.
Well, my wife doesn't want to hear the detail.
I got you.
Yeah, we gotta be careful about when we talk about the past, Todd, because we're both married now.
Yeah, but that was 40 years ago. Come on.
But
It doesn't matter. They still don't want to know.
yeah. So that was my introduction into Panama.
Yeah, that's crazy. The fact that you're, in Noriega's house, first of all, then doing lines on his desk, second of all, it's just some of the craziest stuff I've ever heard. Bruce, do you ever have any contact with heads of state or heads of armies or other countries that you had to deal with and in your endeavors?
No, keep in mind, my loads were 30,000 pounds, and Steve's load was 300,000 pounds. In fact, when he got arrested, and he told me all about this when we met in prison, by the way. We met in that's how I met Steve. We were in Texarkana together, then we went to Pleasanton together, and he told me all about, what he did. But I'm 30,000, he's 300,000, and when he was arrested, he was putting together a 1 million pound load on a barge. In fact, I think he had already invested somewhere between 12 and 20 million. I forget exactly how much he had put into it based on what I read in this book. I'd have to go look at my notes. And this is the book that Steve wrote called The Last Gentleman Smuggler. Yeah, The Last Gentleman Smuggler. Everybody should buy it. It's fascinating reading. But no, I never ran into heads of states because I just wasn't that wealthy.
Right. All right. So what we want to do is Stephen, we're gonna have to have you back because we're again running late on time, and I really want to hear about next time. Your introduction to Bruce, how you became fast friends, and then your life together in Pleasanton with the King of Pot. So with that, I'll say, unbelievable stories, Stephen. We appreciate you coming on. Bruce, as always, always a pleasure to have you.
I do want to inject one thing, Todd, before
Please.
Okay.
Please.
After we were Pleasanton together, and then I got out first, and I started a phone card company with Don Steinberg. He was one of the other first or second largest marijuana smugglers. And when Steve got out of prison, first I got him to Pleasanton. I wrote a letter to him, says, Steve, you got to get here. There's girls, right? And so he got there, and then when we got out, he called me and says, well,
how do you maneuver that, Stephen? How do you get from Texarkana, an all male prison to Pleasanton?
Good lawyers.
Ah.
Yeah.
So I think I introduced you to Alan Ellis,
Yeah.
attorney who specialized in that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to have Stephen back yet another episode so we can hear about the two kings right here that became fast friends and real close in not only Texarkana, but over there in Pleasanton, California, where Bruce discovered women in prison. And of course, he had to tell his buddy Steve, get your butt over to Pleasanton. So we're going to hear that story and how they lived together and sort of manipulated them, the other folks in the prison over in Pleasanton, California. So, Stephen, once again, thanks for joining us. It's just fascinating stuff that you've been through, and thankfully you wrote that book so we can all get all the details. And that's The Last Gentleman Smuggler, which we'll see on another episode coming soon right here on Becoming the King of Pot. He is Bruce Perlowin. That other handsome gentleman is Steven Kalish, also known as the Gentleman Smuggler. I'm Todd Denkin. I'm just the cousin. And we'll see you next time on Becoming the King of Pot.